Good evening, everybody, and greetings from Oxford. Welcome to the Oxford Seminars in Cartography, what is our final TOSCA of this academic year, and we're really looking forward to this one. But first of all, before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors and supporters who've helped us through what's been a really great season. So thanks to the Bodleian Libraries, the University of Oxford, Charles Close Society, Lovell Jones Cartographers, the School of Geography and the Environment, and the Friends of TOSCA. So thanks to you all for supporting what has been a really wonderful season. Now, for those of you who are familiar with TOSCA, can I encourage you to use the Q&A to ask questions at the end of the seminar. My colleague Liz Bagent will be on hand to ask Nick Bolton, our speaker this evening, lots of questions, so do feel free to ask Nick questions. Nick will be talking tonight on Ordnance Survey, 21st Century National Mapping Agency. Now, Nick is CEO of Ordnance Survey, and just to give you a few biographical details, he joined the OS as CEO in October 2023 with extensive commercial, product and marketing experience in growing international technology businesses. Now, as Chief Executive Officer, Nick is responsible for executing the OS strategy and leading the organisation as world leaders in geospatial services, creating location insight for positive impact. Previously, Nick was CEO for the software group Oxford Metrics. For 18 years he did that. His strong track record in successfully leading teams and delivering strategic priorities alongside driving development in both existing and new markets is helping shape Ordnance Survey's future growth. So with great anticipation, I'm really looking forward to this one, and I'd like to welcome Nick to take the floor. So thank you, Nick. We're looking forward to this.
Great. Well, thanks for the kind introduction, Nick. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm a big fan of Nick and of the work that the Bodleian does, and of TOSCA, as well as also some of the sponsors there that I also recognise. So this afternoon, UK time at least, I know some people are dialing in from around the world. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. But good afternoon to those in our same time zone. Today I'm going to cover really what Ordnance Survey is today, because I think it's very well understood where our history is, but I really want to talk about where we are today, and then with a little nod to what we might be doing in the future, which is why we've entitled the presentation 21st Century National Mapping Agency. So let me first of all just share my slides, and it would be good if I could just get a thumbs up from you, Nick, if you can definitely see the slides. I've got a thumbs up, so let's go. Well, so you've heard from Nick a little bit about my bio. I've only been here for 3 years as CEO of Ordnance Survey, and as Nick said before that, I've had a 30-year career in technology, mostly in computer vision, and actually mostly around the Oxford area. I'm an engineer by training, but I have a deep love of maps and mapping. So it feels like this is a wholly good place for me to then, a great community to be able to talk about the modern Ordnance Survey. And the focus really then for today is definitely on that modernity. So I'm the 36th Director General of Ordnance Survey, and we stand on a rich and deep history, founded in 1791 with some great pre-work by an individual called William Roy, and then the Napoleonic threat led to the formation in 1791, Colonel Williams, Mudge, Colby, and so forth. But I'm not going to be talking about any of that. There are some really great books on that, and there are some people much better qualified than I am to talk about that. Just because I'm not talking about it doesn't mean that we should forget about it. You know, these are very much our foundations, and the shoulders upon which we stand, including this chap from September 1953. So I've only got two slides just on a little bit on the history, and that's really because we've got so many wonderful historical artifacts here at Ordnance Survey, including lots of photographs. I think this is Folkestone. I'd have to check that, but we've got lots of books of photographs like this one, where this former Ordnance Survey individual is pointing at a control point, and clearly this is September 53, and the identifier of the control point is there. The reason why you want a control point is it's a very well measured point that then you would measure out from in order to build the maps. One fun little detail is that arrow is actually it's white on one side and black on the other, because depending on the background you were taking. So we've got that's one of, and I've got books of these. So I've got tens of thousands of these images, and we can't really chuck them out because, well, they feel important. You know, we also have things like this amazing spider box, and I don't know if you've come across this. This spider box, it's a beautiful handmade, wooden box. And if you can see in the photograph there, it's got these copper frames in there. And if you looked really closely, although I don't think you're going to see it at the resolution in this presentation, there actually are some spider silk threads that are running down from that top bar to the bottom bar in those cassettes that are inside the box. And that's because this is where we kept the spider thread. We actually kept spiders, and you can see a description of the specific species of spider that was kept in the box. And that's because we needed, for our theodolites, when we were a theodolite, the instrument that measures angles very accurately, we needed a target on the lens element. And for that target, we needed that to be thin and very strong. And that's what the spider silk was used for. But sometimes it would break. And so the theodolite would have to come back to base, and it would be repaired with spider silk from this box. It's talk about, vertically integrated organization, but it does show you the detail and the passion with which Ordnance Survey has always gone about its task. So, but I've already promised that this talk is not going to be backward looking, it's all going to be forward focused. And I'm going to be talking about the 21st century incarnation of Great Britain's National Mapping Agency, what that means for now and what that means for the future. So this is where I'm sitting right now. This is Ordnance Survey's Southampton HQ. It's an amazing building. We've been in Southampton ever since 1841, when we originally were founded in the Tower of London, and then there was a fire in 1841, and they chose to save the crown jewels and not our maps, and we didn't really ever forgive them for that. And so they went on a 2-day march and ended up in a building that was available that happened to be in Southampton, and we've been in Southampton ever since. And in addition to those maps that we were making from that time onwards, we are, and those are clearly the maps that we're very well known for them. But today, the majority of our business is now focused on producing, selling, and supplying the data which sits behind those maps and other forms of diagrammatic representation. And I'm going to explain a bit more about what that data is made up of and how we produce it and so forth. So the data in itself is made up of 600 million features. So where an outline of a building would be a feature, a lamppost would be a feature, a mid-tide point would be a feature, and those are updated 30,000 times a day. And that data you want to just see as a big disaggregated soup, connected, but effectively in lots and lots of tiny pieces. In other words, it's not a map as such, but you can build maps from it. We had this argument actually internally about whether the National Geographic Database, the NGD, that represents those 600 million features, is actually a map. And I think it probably is, based on all the connections, but more you want to see it as the foundational data, which you then can present through whatever aesthetic or mapping decisions that you want, which also, of course, rely on all of the principles of cartography, which are well established and are well understood, that we still hold very dear and close to our heart as an organisation. So that organisation is 1,300 staff now. But today the largest teams are in the data team and the technology team. So gone are the days where we had offices distributed all around the country, and the largest group of staff were based in the field as field surveyors. This is another shot of this incredible building. We are profitable as an organisation, and we turn over about £200 million, where broadly half of that comes from government, about another 80 million comes from private business, and another 20 million comes from the consumer business. And as I said earlier, we still invest in cartography because we still have to produce digital tiles of cartography. People still love them, still use them, and we also still produce wonderful paper maps. In fact, actually, last year we hired some more apprentices, cartographic apprentices, to come in to make sure we can take that capability forward in the future. So we still are investing in it and see it as very central to our essence as an organisation, even in a world of data. And we still do paper maps. And so if you look at this board, I'm sure there are some favourites of some of the people, for some of you. And depending on which one you like the look of, it probably does date you to a certain era. So mine are the pink Land Ranger maps from the 1970s, although I've always had a penchant for the green Pathfinders. We actually built this collection by offering a moratorium on people's old maps. So in other words, if you want an up-to-date map, just send in your old one and we'll send you a new one free. That isn't an offer that's any more live. Okay, I don't want anybody to send me maps unless you really feel like sending maps, but you won't be getting one in exchange. But what we did, people went through their lofts and they produced this most wonderful archive now, really underlining the important role that Ordnance Survey has played in the life of this country for so many years. So we still do paper maps today, and we always will. In fact, last summer, we bought back our printing press. So when we moved to this new building, which was 13 or 14 years ago, we didn't have space for the printing press. And so it was sold to the publishing entrepreneur, Felix Dennis. And gradually, that was for him in part to print his own poetry. So that printing press would have been specially built for us, so it was very good for large format. And they would print not just maps for us, but also for Harveys and for the military as well, because they can do these very large, high quality lithography prints. And that now continues. We brought it back in-house really because we will have a continuing need for it regardless. And they will find it increasingly hard to be able to run the business with a dwindling number of paper maps being produced more broadly in the marketplace. So we now have that facility inside the organisation. But what that really means then is that what we do day in, day out as an organisation is we capture, we refine, and we serve the underlying map data all digitally. So whereas before we might have done it in a very analog way, and again upstairs I've got lovely notebooks of the calculations that surveyors would have done, or the measurements they would have made beforehand into the calculator department, who would have then done all the mathematics longhand in books. Again, I've got artifacts of that. Today, actually, we capture digitally, we refine digitally, and the way we serve that data up is also digital. And so that means that our surveyors are busy with surveying equipment. So this is one of our surveyors who you can see in his left hand. He's got a pole with a GNSS receiver. GNSS stands for Global Navigational Satellite Systems. It's really the generic term for what everybody else calls GPS, but GPS is the specific US implementation of a GNSS system, and other countries have got other navigation satellite systems up there. So he stands there with his pole. On the top of that is the receiver. That receiver communicates to the tablet that's around his neck, and I'll show you a shot of that in a moment. And on that, he will say, well, he will then map out the artifact that he's measuring within the real world. So basically, you take the pole, you point the point at the thing you're trying to measure. It doesn't have to be upright. It's clever enough now to know which angle you're pointing at. So if you want the corner of a building, you take the pointy end and you point it at the corner of the building. Equally, if you want to know a roof height and you could point to it, again, you can survey at that degree. And this measurement system gives you sub-centimetre or around a centimetre's worth of accuracy. And it can do that, which is clearly different than the GPS capability in your phones. And that's because we have a network called OSNet of 120 reference points across the country that you want to see almost as the modern trig pillars. Yeah. And what they do is they're very well surveyed. They receive the timing signal from the satellites in the same way your phone receives the timing signal from the satellites that it then uses to work out where must that phone be, or rather in this instance, where is that device in world space. Those fixed elements of the OS net, they have receivers on top. They don't move. They're very fixed, so they can get really good, and they're in locations that have really good lines direct to the satellites. And so because they do a really good job of getting a fix on where it is, and we know where it is, any adjustment then we can then correct for. And so we send that correction signal to the surveyor, to the pole that's in his hand, and then that corrects for it. So that's a very important piece of national infrastructure that's all around the country. And it corrects not just for our own surveyors, we sell that capability to other people, to people like Trimble and Leica, who then provide a greater precision services for other markets, including precision agriculture. So now you have tractors that can drive themselves up and down fields, but they can't deal with the inaccuracy of GPS location that you get from your phone. They need it much more accurate than that. Otherwise, the field would have, wobbly crops. So that's a service that we actually provide to those organisations then to resell to John Deere and Ford to make their tractors work better. So the software itself, we write the software that is used on those capture tablets. I'm painting that picture really because you can then soon understand that actually Ordnance Survey is increasingly we're a technology company. We write software to capture data, we write software to refine that data, and then we write software to serve that out through a server. And there are within that, and I would say this is true pretty much for any aspect of mapping. One of the great things about maps is they're immediately consumable. They're at a glance. You can pick up a paper map and immediately understand something about that environment that the map is depicting. But actually, to produce that map is actually incredibly involved and incredibly complex. And we rather thrive on that and like that here. To give you an example of that, this software has to deal with, well, what happens when you've got a boundary from one property butting up with a boundary of another? Who does that edge between the two belong to? And I don't mean in terms of ownership, but does it belong to the polygon that represents building A or building B? And if there's a conflict between it, between what I've just surveyed and it seems to be in a different place, what do I do about it? Do I adjust just mine, or do I adjust that one? So it's not straightforward. How you deal with that conflict resolution has to be resolved by the surveyors, and they have to have tools to be able to do that. You also see on the tablet there that the surveyor there is surveying all sorts of different artifacts. Points, they're the sort of greeny grey points, lines, so the boundaries, and also then the polygons of the building footprints. And that really is the very start of the process. So, there the surveyor isn't building the map, they're capturing the data that then further down the line, a cartographer might actually then make a decision to generalize, to make a decision about, well, how should that actually then appear on a 1 to 25 thou or 1 to 50 thou map. So that's one way that we survey, boots on the ground, but also increasingly we're adopting new ways to capture. So I'm hoping you can see this in this slide. There's a drone. This is our building from the outside. There is a drone on the quadcopter on the outside there. We now have almost about a third of our surveyors. So we have about 120 surveyors around the country, and a third of those now are qualified drone pilots. And what they do is they'll go to a site. Let's say there's a new housing estate that's been built. They'll do this. They'll recce the site. They'll decide is it safe to put up a drone. You then upload to the drone the patch of ground that you're interested in it capturing. That's all you have to do. You then press go. The drone then just takes off. It flies to a certain height that is usually defined against our specification and standard. And then it just tractors up and down to capture the imagery of the ground. And if the wind blows a bit too much and the camera's wobbling around, what it will do is it will just hover and wait a bit for the wind to die down, and then it will carry on and do its thing. And then, so you end up then with effectively a series of images that are being taken from the nadir, so taken from this top position, that will have some degree of overlap, yeah, because the frame rate of the camera as it's taking the pictures, there'll be overlap between all those pictures. But the drone technology now is so sophisticated that we don't even see any of that. What we get is just a mosaic of an ortho-rectified image. In other words, a bird's eye view from a universal bird's eye view, not just a single point, which is perpendicular to the ground at all points, ortho-rectified. And so that's actually made the task, and it's incredibly high quality imagery. So that means that you can get to a site and within half an hour effectively have surveyed everything you need to. Now we then take that ortho-rectified image, and that actually just goes straight to an outsourced supply chain, who then from that will decide, are there any changes that need to be made, and equally then will digitize that in the same way that, using the same software that the surveyor I showed you one slide back would use, but doing it from the aerial imagery rather than from the GPS GNSS pole. So that's drones. We do that, but we don't stop there. We still have our own flying program, which flies Great Britain every 3 years. So our imagery is no further out of date than 3 years. And this is looking underneath the plane actually of our plane, and you can see that's a sensing device which is more than just a single camera. It's got multiple cameras on board. One's to take an nadir view, one's to take an oblique view. It's also capable of capturing LiDAR, which would give you a distance measurement from the plane down to the ground. And so you can see that actually you end up with this very rich sensed environment. In fact, actually, you're in danger of having too much data, to process. And so that means that we make extensive use of convolutional neural nets, which is a type of AI. The big breakthrough in convolutional neural nets, or CNNs, was in 2012. So although the world has suddenly woken up that AI is kind of important now, clearly that's all being driven by this Gen AI world and LLMs, but actually it's been used in computer vision for many years. In fact, my last business, we used it extensively for that business. And I'm really pleased to say that Ordnance Survey was one of the first, if not the first, to get on and use that breakthrough technology from 2012 in the way that we produce and extract features. We call that internally automatic feature extraction. So effectively you can just throw the body of images at a computer, and the computer will extract from that, well, we believe this to be a building, that to be a building, that to be a duck pond, etc. Clearly, we have a whole series of quality assurance processes that don't just trust the AI. We put a human in the loop in that process to make sure that it really does it is what it says it is. And we're forever working on improving that technology. So each time we find an anomaly where it's done a bad job of recognizing the feature, can we retrain the net to improve it, to make it better? So you've seen some of the sort of high technology ways that we source data, but we also do it in more analog ways, and we also source not from these proprietary sources, but also from readily available sources. My favorite, so internally we call this open int or open intelligence. My favorite one is the Allotment Society of Great Britain. So they have a list of where all of the allotments are in the country, and they all have slightly different names, different track ground names. And so when we put an allotment into the National Geographic database, we try and capture both the sort of formal name, but also the vernacular name of that. So sometimes we source from organisations like that have got good records and good data. Sometimes we source from commercial sources. So there are companies that have surveyed speed limits on roads, and we again do a QA process on that, and then we serve that data up. And also we crowdsource data. So we have a thing called the Vernacular Names Gazetteer, and if you search for that online, you can find it on our website, where the idea of the gazetteer is to capture all of the common names that people use every day to describe different geographic features. So when I was a schoolboy and played rugby, we used to go on pre-season training into North Norfolk, and there was a thing known as the Beeston Bump. Mainly because it was a large lump that was near Beeston. So that would be a vernacular name that the locals would know it as Beeston Bump. And I'm sure you can all think of in your own lives, even family nicknames for different features. And so if you've got vernacular names, I'd encourage you to go to the website and update it. And you'll be in good company if you did that. Princess Anne, when she came to see us February of 24, had the opportunity to enter the wedding cake, which is the vernacular name of the fountain that's in front of Buckingham Palace. So you'd be amongst good company, amongst royalty, if you did contribute your vernacular names to that. So I'm trying to paint a picture here that actually it's a pretty complex way that we actually source the data, that we refine the data, and we then QA and serve that data out to people. And that really very much differs from where we were even just 30 or 40 years ago. And there was a retiring surveyor who was retiring here after 42 years. We have a lot of people here who served many years. In fact, we have so many people who work here for so long that you don't get a clock or a gold watch until you've been here for 40 years. And even then, what you get is, one, you get a meeting with me, which you could argue is not so exciting for people, but you get a plaque with a benchmark on it, something like this. Which again, if you're even slightly into trig pillars and so forth, I think you'll all know what this is for and how you put an angle bracket in it. So you have to be here 40 years for that. You might get a letter from the Director General after 30 years. But anyway, there was a surveyor who was retiring after 40 years, and I was having a chat with him, and I was saying, you've got to remember that Ordnance surveys, is very different today. For the first 150 years, the tools really didn't change. You had a theodolite and you had a tape measure, and we were, completely vertically integrated. And so I was saying, the tools for the surveyor in 1956 were very similar to the tools in 1796. And he said, no, Nick, it was much worse than that. I can tell you for the first 200 years, the tools were broadly the same. And it's really over the last 30 years that it's completely changed. And I think it's testimony to the capability of this organisation. That's nothing to do with me. It's long before this. But this organisation was on the digitisation route long before our colleague organisations in Europe or in the States or elsewhere in the world were on it. We very much, as an organisation, very much lead the world. And so now we've moved from this vertically integrated business where we employed We employed not just the surveyors to do the surveying, we employed the spiders to generate the silk, for those theodolites, all the way through, not just to the printing press, but to the envelopes that we would send out to stores as well as to people. And now, of course, as is the way with the world, actually, we source now from a wide variety of sources that are outside our organisation in order to make sure that we drive value for money. And we also distribute to a wide variety of destinations. So what does that then mean for the actual data that we do hold? Now, I thought it would be interesting, well, I'm hoping it's going to be interesting, to really sort of describe a bit of what these 600 million features are. They break down really to these 8 broad groups. We've covered the first one already, the positioning data. That's the stuff that goes to John Deere tractors. And is also used by the highways industry to correct the GPS on board their vehicles for their surveying vehicles that go round. We still, as I say, do both digital and paper maps, and we also provide imagery. So that imagery that comes from the flying program, we provide, and that, of course, is all has to be appropriately indexed to British National Grid so that you get the right tile for where you are. We also know about land and terrain, so how the land is used, what it's used for. That's used by everybody from DEFRA as well as agronomists. So if you're fans of Clarkson's farm, the agronomist is, what's the chap's name? He's Oxford based. It will come back to me. Charlie. Charlie is the one who, holds his head when he sees Clarkson's done something stupid. But actually what Charlie is doing, when you might have seen his tablet, he's actually using our data to better plan what should they put in which field where. And that helps then to understand the elevation of that land, the aspect of the land, what the land's been used for in the past, or what it's covered with. And you can see that that's important for policy deciders also within Whitehall. So we know all about the land and the terrain. We know all about the water. So we know about rivers and estuaries. We also know about canals. We also know about everything up to the mid tide point. So we look after everything from the mid tide point upwards the beach, and then the UK Hydrographic Office, based down in Taunton, that's part of the Ministry of Defence, looks after the mid tide point down. And so we work very closely, not just with UKHO, but with other bodies that have got geospatial responsibilities for Britain. So you can imagine that we work closely with the British Geological Survey, which is clearly deeper underground, as well as all of the water folks as well. On buildings and infrastructure, which is probably the one we're most famous for, and everyone can see a need for that. I was just going to describe a little bit about what that looks like. So clearly this is the buildings that if you're in Great Britain right now, certainly for the western wing of the Bodleian Library, which I think is where Nick is right now, we know where all of that is. We have the definitive data store for all buildings in Great Britain. And the sort of information we have on that is really very, very rich. So in the building family, we have, first of all, these broad groups. Is it a building line? Is it part of a building? Or is it the building itself? Or is it access to that building? So you can see already there that you've got a granularity to that information. But more than that, so if we just pick out one of those families, the building family, we have about 40 or so attributes for every building. So that includes the geometry of the building, so the polygon that makes up the footprint, including if you've got any extensions that sit on the back. We've got information about what the building's used for. Is it a public library? Is it residential? Is it commercial? We've got the number of addresses, the number of count of addresses that might be at that site. If it's a block of flats, it might be one polygon, but it might be made up of 6 addresses. We know about the number of floors of every building. So for a block of flats, that might be 5 floors. For a single-story bungalow, it would be 1. But we know that not just for residential, we know that for commercial as well. We know what the building's made of, so we know its construction material. Is it brick? Is it lath and plaster? We know the building age, or at least we have information as it's available of that. Clearly, for a new build, we can be very precise about that. For other information, there might be a range or an approximation of dates in there. We know if there's a basement present within that building. We know what the roof is made of, what the shape of the roof is, and even what aspect the roof is. And you can probably guess that that's quite useful if you're trying to plan the addition of solar cells on top of roofs. You don't want to put them on the north face side in Britain. You want to put them on the south facing side. And so for each of those, there's also a specification. So, for example, we don't just know about the geometry, we know about the area of that geometry, and we publish that in meters squared. So if you actually go to our website, and I would encourage you to do it, although you might have to explain why you're nerding out quite so much on the data. But I think it's genuinely interesting. I wouldn't have the job if I didn't find all this stuff interesting. You can actually see then the description, the specification, and when we of course use that for when we then capture it. So we even know things like its physical state. Is it a building where there are three aspects to that? It could be built. The building is fully constructed and in a usable state. It could be derelict. The building is in a state of decay but retains most all of its roots. By the way, I'm quoting here from the actual website. Or the building is contained within a site that has fallen into a visible state of dereliction, or it could be under construction. The building is currently being developed or built. So you can see through that whole process how we end up with so much data. The 600 million features updated 30,000 times a day. And that's just buildings. If we were to touch on the other families, you can imagine what information we have about water, about land, and so forth. We also have information about areas and zones. This is one where I have a statutory responsibility. So we have to provide the boundary information to the Boundary Commission for when they define the boundaries for elections. And so clearly we were almost blindsided, but not quite, when the election was called slightly early in 2024. So we had to rush because we had a few changes that we were needing to make, and the Boundary Commission said they needed it by Tuesday. And of course, we didn't panic. We got it done, and the election went ahead as expected. So we do that sort of stuff as well. We also do addresses and names. We've already talked about vernacular names. Addresses are really important and almost a very invisible part of the very important data fabric that makes up the country. It doesn't just relate to can you get post to your house. It relates to can blue light services get to your house. It relates to the takeaway meals and so forth. So addressing is a very core element, and within that, we're not the post office, or rather, sorry, of Royal Mail. They're the ones who own and maintain the postcode address file. A postcode is typically made up of 20 or so different properties, and then you have to have a house number, house name, or street name to define that. So that's clearly a common way that we define an address, but we also look after what's called a UPRN, a unique property reference number, which is we have a UPRN for every property in the country, including an apartment that is in a block of flats. And so when people use our data there, they're using both the postcode address file, the addressing file of that comes out of Royal Mail, but they use that alongside our UPRN numbers. And that means then that when a utility is coming out to fix an electrical fault or put in some new infrastructure for you, they're using the UPRN to be very clear that this is the property that they should be doing that. But clearly, when they're talking to us as customers, they're probably using our house name or a house number, street name, and postcode. So a very important part of our business and an important part of the fabric of the country. And then lastly, we also do networks for transport. And networks really, they're really how things connect. So in other words, if I wanted to be able to develop a route that I could take my bike safely from Southampton up to Oxford, we need to be able to provide the data that a computer algorithm could work out the most efficient way to do that. And that I might even say, and I don't want to climb up too many hills, and it could then route around that. So for that data to be useful, it has to know how each of those roads actually connects to each other, as well as things like road width data, but that's more similar to the sort of buildings and infrastructure. So really, this is a very wide range of data. Um, then, then the next question is, well, so where does all this end up? Well, the answer is it ends up in lots and lots of different places. In fact, it ends up in so many places, it actually makes it almost provides the antithesis of how to run a business. What you're trying to do in so many ways with a business is try to find a sizable enough audience to make your business function, and then do a repeatable thing for them in a repeatable way. And that's fine, if you are an ice cream salesman on Portsmouth Harbour and you're selling ice creams in the summer, you know how big the market is. You can do the repeatable ice cream, and you're really broadly saying to people who want ice creams, who happen to be there. Our data ends up in a very wide variety of places, and this is how we categorize them. It ends up in financial services institutions, so Nationwide uses very widely for evaluating mortgages. Direct Line uses for evaluating insurance premiums, and clearly they'd be interested in things like floods, but they're also interested in what the building construction and age is. It's used very widely in security and resilience, both by the military as well as by the civilian services. It's used very extensively in land and property. So it's used both by the land registry. So we do all of the surveying for the land registry. Clearly, the land registry are the ones that look after the actual register, and they're the ones who take all the liability, such that, but we're the ones providing the data for that. But equally, we also provide data for when you get your home buyers report and you get the pages saying, well, there's a radio mast there, the floodplain runs to here and so forth. And it's our data that underpins all of that. Telecoms companies use us, including height models, in order to work out where do they need to put different cell phone towers in order to make sure they get coverage. And so it continues. Retailers use it to work out where should they put a Costa, which car park should they put a pop-up Costa in order to make sure distribution works, as well as footfall can be expected from other stores nearby. So there really isn't an aspect of modern British life that we really don't touch. So that's kind of what we produce today. That's where it goes, and so that means that really that's what we do. We're in the data business, but data in and of itself isn't enough. I mean, I describe it internally as it's this colourless, tasteless, odourless thing that really almost has no intrinsic value. It only has value in its extrinsic expression. Another way to think about this is that it's not data that's the interesting bit. It's the insight that you get from it. Now, there's a US marketing academic in the 60s who wrote a paper called Marketing Myopia called Theodore Levitt, who said that people don't want quarter-inch drill bits, they want quarter-inch holes. And we're in the same business. People don't want light bulbs, they want light. So it's all very well us, capturing this incredibly high quality, very rich data set, but we also have to make sure there are mechanisms to turn those into meaningful maps. Some of those maps we'll produce, some of them they'll exist only digitally, and some of them won't even be recognised as having any principles of cartography, because it may just be a yes or a no. Put a nuclear power station here, yes. Put a nuclear power station here, no. Or it could be a number. This is how many floors we need to build, or how many homes we need to build in this site. And so really, this means our strategy for the future is all about better data and more destinations. Better data means more applicable, solve for more problems. We know that today we provide foundational authoritative data. It's a general purpose technology that is then used in a wide variety of different areas as described in the markets. And our job is to continuously improve that data integrity. One of the reasons why you come to Ordnance Survey is that you can be assured that it comes with the absolute gold standard of reliability and connectedness. So we have to continuously, that's not a job you just do on a Monday and you think you've done it by the Friday. That's been the work of 235 years. We have to be continuously looking to do that. At the same time as making sure that we're efficient. So increasing the automation on there. So the blue part of that triangle is the bit that we're very much directly responsible for. But you can see the farther you head over to the insight, we do produce our own app, we do produce our own paper maps, and we do have our own capabilities to interpret that data. But we also empower an ecosystem within Great Britain of private businesses, of public institutions who take all of that data and then they turn those into insights. And so our job on that side to drive more destinations for our data, it's about collaborating and facilitating that. In other words, it's about conducting the ecosystem to be able to draw more data through to solve for more problems that more people have in more areas. And that, of course, is the way then to deal with the wide market variety, is to have experts in each of those markets who know how to take Ordnance Survey data and turn that into valuable insights. And so our task there really is to remove the friction for discovering and using data. When you've got 600 million features, it's awfully hard to actually without knowing that you've already got it, to actually even discover that we've got that piece of data. And of course, we're making that haystack even bigger all the time to find the needle that you're looking for. We have to open those insights to more people. If you know anybody who is a GIS analyst, they're the people who often take our data and turn it into a geospatial information system, a piece of geospatial intelligence. There are very small people who've got those skills, and yet we've all got place and where questions. Where should we go on holiday this week? Where should I put that new entry to the road, or where should we add a relief road? And so those questions shouldn't just be the domain of the GIS expert. There's always a role for them, but rather how can we open up the ecosystem to a wider audience? And so that's really our strategy in a single slide. We try to bring that to life within the organization by stating our ambitions, where we have 5 that are external and 3 that are internal. So 1 to 5 are all the externals. They're about making sure that we're the authority for Great Britain around position. Clearly, if GPS was suddenly turned off, as we know have been instances of happening across the Middle East and across certain parts of Eastern Europe, things start to go wrong. And we don't really realise how much we rely on as a country for that satellite signal. And so we as an organisation are best positioned to provide that positioning expertise for the country. We've got to make sure we carry on refining and managing the national map. As part of that, we also recognise that the data we provide is only the start point. To answer a lot of the questions, you need data from other sources, which often exist inside public sectors. So, for example, the Office of National Statistics has good information about household income or poverty or access to green facilities. So, if you can serve that alongside the place, then you end up with a much richer set of insights that can created. But they won't be created unless you do 4, which is about making it easier to come by those spatial insights. And we do that by democratizing the discovery and use of that. And I'll mention a little bit about that at the in my final slide, where I talk a bit about the future. And then lastly, we're not going to forget the 9 million phones that we're on with our OS Maps product, or our 500,000 subscribers on there, as well as the miles of paper maps that everyone rely on every weekend or weekday to go on walks. We've got a very core purpose to help people get outside and enjoy the outdoors more often. So that's externally. Internally, we've got to carry on improving the way we produce that data. We've got to make sure that we continue to grow the long-term value of the organisation. We're a centennial organisation. We've been around for over 100 years, and we will be needed in 100 years' time as well. So that means that there's nothing here that we should be making short-term decisions on. We have to recognise that we're improving the value of the asset all along. And then lastly, we have really materially changed over the past 30 years as an organisation. We are really now a technology business that monetizes itself through data. And so we have to make sure we live into that, because that's how we attract and how we retain the right individuals, the team that we need here to make sure that Ordnance Survey is fit for the future. I've got 2 more slides. One is just finally to talk about our value chain, which is how we create value, which I hope is interesting to this group. And you can map paper maps onto exactly this value chain. A value chain, all it really describes is how you add value to inputs in order to create value to outputs. So it's easy to think about that in a restaurant. A restaurant would take inputs of raw ingredients, and then through the value they add, they turn it into a plate of food that we're willing to pay more for than we would have paid for the original raw ingredients. So that's a restaurant value chain would be about how do I source ingredients, how do I cook them up, how do I prepare them, how do I cook them up, how do I serve them out, and then through that value is created, which means you can charge more for the plate of food. So we have 5 dimensions to our value chain: positioning, sourcing, refining, distributing, applying. Of course, they take us from that journey from data through to insight. So position is all about that GNSS, that GPS system. It's about that reference framework, the AusNet system I talked about. It's also about making sure that we're up to date with geodesy. The beach ball earth upon which we live changes shape. And we have to be mindful of that because we have a grid that's mapped over Great Britain. But if the shape of the planet changes, then effectively where we thought things were, they're no longer there. So we represent geodesy in a series of international standards bodies. And that's really is very important work. We source from a wide variety of sources that I've mentioned. We then take that and we refine it increasingly through automated mechanisms, all through technology. But of course, cartography sits in there, and we still produce both the maps that you'd recognize, the 1 to 20 thou and the 1 to 50 thou, the pinks and the oranges, but we also produce things for air traffic control at 1 to 250k and 1 to 500k. And if any of you are private pilots, if you've bought, which I think you have to have a paper map in your cockpit, that's based again on our data, but of course it's generalized up so that you don't have all the features, but you have the ones that you can see from the air. And then with that data, we then have to distribute it, and we distribute that for a wide variety of different ways. Sometimes it's in the post because it's a paper map, and sometimes it's through a very sophisticated server, and sometimes it's through a download, or sometimes it's through an API. And even sometimes we supply to someone else who wants to incorporate it in their software. And so we send our data off to them, and then that's embedded within their software. And then lastly, lest we forget the very important of turning the light bulb on, it then gets to applied, and it ends up in a wide variety of different sources. If you've heard of a term called data science, that's increasingly receiving geospatial data, but it also ends up on websites and in web tools. If you go to your local authority website, it's likely that they're using our data. And also, we encourage active innovation within the space. In fact, we have an incubator based in London that is taking our data and finding new applications for an organisation called Geovation. And so that's it. That's what we do today. That's 21st century Ordnance Survey. I'm just going to paint a little bit of a picture about what's coming next, which is encapsulated rather well with this little screen grab of a product we call Data Explorer. Now, you'd heard me say earlier that when you've got 600 million features, it's awfully hard to find what you're looking for unless you know what you're looking for in the first place. Discovery is very difficult. And so what we've done is we've effectively combined a large language model so that you can now chat with that data. But more than that, not just chat with the what's in the data, but actually see it on a map. Because it's when you see it on a map, do you then realize, actually, well, that's really interesting. That means that I could do this with it, or I could do that with it. And so that's exactly what we've built. And it's through that tool that we really do want to put geospatial insight within the reach of everyone within Britain. We think that location is the obvious way to connect all data. You can get data on school exam results or healthcare outcomes within a hospital. All that happens somewhere, and because everything happens somewhere, the obvious way to connect all of that is through geospatial. And so I wanted to really just close on really a personal story, but also something that recognises the shoulders upon which we stand. Before I took this role, before I started, I'd already accepted the job. It was my daughter's 21st birthday. And so we took her away to a hotel. The part of staying in a hotel is that they have these wonderful grounds. And if you ask nicely, the arborists and the keepers of the gardens will take you on a tour. And so why not sign up for this? So we signed up for to be taken round by the person responsible for the woodlands. And he was taking us through all these woodlands and he was explaining that, when a tree falls, you should let it fall, don't clear it up because that's where all the insects live and the insects are good because they feed the other wildlife in the wood. You're not supposed to pull down tree ivy because that's a way to actually protect certain aspects of the tree. I don't really understand that because they all seem to damage trees. But anyway, so he's giving us all this advice. And then as we rounded one corner, he looked down to a plain where there were these two significant oak trees, a 500-year-old oak tree and a 400-year-old oak tree, or maybe 400 and 300, but old. And he said, and they're my pride and joy. And he said, they're my pride and joy because they stood here long before I ever got here, and they'll be standing long afterwards. And all my task is to leave the forest and leave those trees in a better condition than I inherited them. And that really is the metaphor of what we're trying to achieve at Ordnance Survey. We're just trying to leave that estate of geospatial information, of geographical information in a better state than we inherited it. And if we do that bit right, there'll be someone in 100 years' time sitting at maybe not this desk, maybe not even sitting at a camera, but maybe full virtual reality and experience describing the 22nd century National Mapping Agency. Thanks for your attention.
Well, thanks so much, Nick. That was really stimulating talk. I've never seen so many questions coming through in our question and answer already. So may I invite you, Nick, to put your camera back on if you're ready to face our questioners.
Yeah.
There seems to be a large, that's better. I'm sure our audience would rather see you large than me.
Then my big slide. Yeah.
So thank you again. That was really, really very stimulating. So I've got lots and lots of questions here already. If any other members of the audience would like to join in and pose some questions, can I invite you to do that in the question and answer facility? You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. Sometimes it doesn't show very much, in which case move right and there's another thing that says other features or something like that, and you can pick it up there. Don't pop it in the chat because we won't monitor that for questions. So question answer is the facility that we need. And here come the questions. So lots of different aspects of your talk have stimulated people. Now, Jill asks, what relationship, if any, does OS have with what three words? I'm sure. So perhaps I could just explain, or you could just explain what three words are. Yeah, what that's.
So what three words is a really useful online service that effectively has divided up the whole of the world into a series of hexagons, if I'm doing it from memory, which effectively each hexagon, which I think is 6 meters across, I think it's of that order. And each hexagon has effectively got three words associated with it. So it might be dog, brush, cow, and that's where your house is. So it's a very useful way, especially in those communities that don't have such formalized addressing as we do, say, within the Western economies, to actually be able to specify a location and then meet someone there or deliver something there or connect there. And so we actually we know the team very well at what three words, and it is a useful way that, for example, emergency services who integrate what three words with our own data, because if they've got someone who's in need of help, they often don't have access to British National Grid. They don't necessarily know what street they're in, but they might have the app on their phone that tells you what three words, and so they will then use that. So I think it's a tremendous innovation, and it's great that came out of Britain, which is where it did for the whole world. And for me, it represents for us another way of doing really useful addressing. It doesn't replace postcode. It doesn't replace UPRN. In other countries like Ireland, where they have an AirPost number, it doesn't replace that, but it definitely does augment it. And for me, the more the merrier.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, you mentioned deliveries there, and we have a
Yes.
question from a one of our audiences who's obviously had delivery
Sure.
problems in the past. And she says delivery companies do not appear to buy your data to help their drivers. Am I correct?
Well, it's complicated. Let's put it that way. So some do, okay, but equally that's no. And I speak from personal experience here because I know who they are, and I can't tell you who they are and who they're not on this call. But what I don't recognise is that they're as reliable as you would expect with that quality of data, and it's a bit to do with the way postcodes work. Postcodes made a lot of sense when you had this where everyone had a local postie, and the local postie knew the patch really well. My mum was a postie in our little village, and of course, and actually her rounds always took about 3 times longer than anybody else because she would chat with everybody. But that's because she knew the local community really well. Whereas now, actually, a DPD delivery driver and every driver. Once they know the patch, and it takes them, say, 3 months to do that, they're tremendous and they find your house every time. The problem is they have such a high turnover of staff they don't actually ever require that. And so they're working both on postcode, but they're also working on some are working on UPRN, this individual thing of that every product you can go and look up your UPRN as well on I think it's the GeoPlace website, so you can go and find that number. But equally, if you rang up Deliveroo and said, "I want you to deliver the pizza to UPRN 67549," they aren't going to know it. They're still going to work on postcode. So that's one problem, right? Is that they might have the data. The second problem they have is that often those postcodes, finding your address is actually quite hard. So in my postcode, there are 3 roads it could be on, but you've got to go through 3 different access points to get there. So invariably, the Ocado deliverer for Louise's house in Duchess Close, every 3 months they knock on our door and said, "You don't know where blah 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 is," and it was, yes, out on the high street and then left and so forth. So unfortunately, I haven't got an easy answer to this except to say all of those companies know that this is a problem, and all of those companies are increasingly improving the quality of that data, especially since they've got delivery drivers who can capture that data, which Amazon, as an example, do capture that. So if there's a new address, they capture that and that goes back into their system. If they learn actually we've built an extension and we've turned the whole house around and the front door is no longer the front door, it's now the back door, they capture that as well. And I think you're going to see increasingly more of that. That should mean slightly warmer pizza when it arrives. And no guarantees.
Thank you. I hope that's a comfort to Anne because she's obviously had some difficulties. So we've now got a couple of questions really about updating. So Peter asks about sort of how you use feedback to update. And another viewer asks, says that she tried to report, or he tried to report an error in a map and wasn't sort of completely sure how to see that process through, and
Sure.
particularly was unable to shed light on which layer the information was, with the erroneous information was on. So perhaps you
Sure.
could just tell us a little bit about update,
Sure.
how people can
Yes.
participate in
So
the process. And if people get questions about layers, how you might translate that for them into into providing better feedback.
sure. So we actually get a lot of input from people because they know their areas, their locales, their regions, and they care about them. And so clearly that covers everything from actually neighbourly property disputes, yeah, which don't come to us. They go to land registry, yeah. But then land registry, depending on the case, they have to decide how they deal with that. But they might get us to go out and just check what's going on the ground and resurvey that, and then we provide the data to that, and then of course that HMLR will then deliver that message back out to the individuals involved. Sometimes people write directly to us and trying to get us to resolve neighbourly disputes, and that's not something I can help with, and we have to direct them at the land registry, etc. So that's one route. There are other routes. We have an errors and omissions portal on our website. So if you see something that's not quite right, tell us about it. And then we have a detailed process internally that evaluates that. I'd love to say that everybody who uses that has a completely innocent motivation for that all they want to do is improve the national map. But I can't say that. Some people don't want a footpath going through their garden. They knew it when they bought the house, but they don't like it, and so they would try to suggest that there isn't a footpath there and so forth. So there are areas there that we, of course, have to take our responsibility as the National Mapping Agency seriously. But equally, invariably, the majority of people have got good intentions, and we absolutely listen to those. The other thing we also do is clearly we do through all our surveying work. In lots of ways, we're checking our homework all the time. Yeah. So if there's a new way, if there's new improved surveying techniques, and we're flying the country, there's nothing stopping us, and we do this. That actually we might correct some of the data within data, because we now got a better fix on it. Now that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, that's fixed the core data. When does that translate then into probably, I think the question is probably asking about 1 to 25,000, 1 to 50,000 mapping. And the answer to that is it really does all depend. So we try to keep our paper, our walking maps very, very up to date in those maps that are clearly in higher demand. So the Lake District, the best-selling maps in the country are of the Lake District. So we are on Ambleside and Windermere trying to make sure that those layers do get updated. There are other maps that don't sell as well. Yeah, Land Ranger in Scotland is used, but it's not. It doesn't sell that well. It doesn't sell that well, and so we prioritise on that basis. And so that means it might take a few more cycles. I think we've got some maps that are actually over 10 years old now, which is something that we've begun a campaign to try to lift the recency of that. But as I said in the presentation, this isn't the work. There's nothing in this business that's the work of a single afternoon. This is long-term, constant attention to improving that. So I think if the person who asked the question has a specific comment about errors and omissions, try using the website. If that doesn't work, just email me directly, nick.bolton@os.uk, and I'll make sure it goes into that process. I'm not suggesting I will fix it. I don't want anybody to think that the cartographer and me will get a chance to do a PEX line as a result of that. But it is important that we engage with people who've got genuine and great feedback, and we want to capture that.
Lovely, thank you. Good. So on a very different topic now, one of our audience members wonders whether the OS data can make it safer for women in public spaces and out of doors, maybe one day.
Yeah, that is something that there's a startup that's doing exactly that, and trying to work out effectively routes that will be more populated after dark, that will be more illuminated after dark. I mean, clearly, this comes with the caveat that I don't want to live in a society where women can't walk down any street. But I can't fix that alone. What we can do is through some of the use of our data, and this really fits with the insight end. How do we support those people that want to build applications to make safe travel safe? And that doesn't just cover women feeling safe. It also covers routes for people with pushchairs who want changing facilities, or people who want to use accessible trains and so forth. And so there's lots of work that our data is being used to support all of those applications. And that is part of our product team's work, is to listen then to the market on, it would be really useful if I just knew, a bit like National Rail has, although clearly they could do a better job of improving some accessibility to some of those stations. But effectively, know that you've got to go two stops at line to get off on the wheelchair, to then come back south 2 stops to actually get off on the platform that you wanted to get off in the first place. But there's definitely more that we can do there in and around safe travel. And I would say, actually, in my conversations with Whitehall, there's increasing interest in that area, which I think is a positive sign for all of us.
Thank you. That's encouraging. A Complete different question now. One of our audience members would like to know how important in financially and in human resource terms are paper maps to the Ordnance Survey.
Less so than the app. So the OS Maps app is much more financially important to us than the paper maps. But we're still, I've tried to do this from memory. I think we do about 1 million paper maps a year, so it's not insignificant. And regardless of that, whilst I'm sitting in this seat, and I don't see it will ever change, even if I wasn't in this seat, we're going to continue producing paper maps. It's an important way that people get outdoors more often, and that's, as I said earlier, that's one of our key ambitions. And so that's part of the reason why we bought Dennis Maps back in house, is that we recognise the role paper maps has to play in both everyday life, but as well as also security and resilience for the country. And as I said also in presentation, we also print the maps for Harvey's maps. If anybody's an orienteer or keen on outdoors, Harvey maps are brilliant. Yeah, and I am as a big advocate for their business as I am for our own paper maps. So it's more modest volume, volume percentage of our revenues, but that doesn't mean it's not important, and it will always continue as part of our offer. And one way to think about that actually is that what we find is that when people go adventuring, they go on holiday to Peak District or whatever, they often buy. We find our OS Maps app subscriber, they buy the paper map to go with it, and then they use the paper map for planning. The big dining table, roll or outright, or in the back of the tent, where are we going tomorrow? And then when they're actually out in the field, the app that then puts your blue dot of where you are near Blue John Caves, it really helps you to navigate. So even there, you can see that the analog world will exist alongside the digital. So I'm a fan of paper maps, and I don't see it disappearing anytime soon.
There's not an age gradient there. I mean, it's very often said that
a little bit, and we're always looking at that. But equally, I live up by Reading, and the Thames Path runs through my village. And just last weekend, I think it was Bronze DV weekend, and so there are all these teenagers, a backpack which is dwarfing them. I wish they just wouldn't pack so much stuff. I know DV requires you to, but they should go with smaller packs. And they've all got OS Maps, and I love that. They're being introduced to the great aspects and art of map reading, and that's a really important, spatial cognitive tool. It will help them in later life. We're still also the only organisation the only organisation, as in company, that's named in the national curriculum. So we still provide the maps for the map question on the geography GCSEs, and again, long may that continue as well. Because again, we are so good at this as Britain. So if I go and see my European colleagues at a thing called Eurogeographics, or I go and meet the USGS, the US equivalent, they're envious of our position. That we sit as a dedicated mapping group and as an agency. The French don't have that anymore. The French has been rolled with the Forestry Commission. I'm sure it makes sense in Paris. I don't think it makes sense, really, when you consider that maps and mapping data provide this invisible fabric upon which, yes, recreation happens, yes, forestry happens, but so do roads, so does education, so does health. That's the fabric that we provide. And our independence with that, I think, is a real strength. And we are very much the envy whenever we envy of all the other national mapping agencies.
Thank you. So, some getting through the questions quite quickly. Just very warm thanks from one of our attenders in Colorado who doesn't ask a question but just wants to say that she found an Ordnance Survey symbol in a headstone in her part of the world. So
really?
Yes.
That's a lovely story. Well, Denver's a city I know very well. It's where our US office was based.
Right.
And I love it very much. Talking about notations, two stories to tell you there. One, I was contacted by a high school teacher in the US via the USGS, so via my opposite number at the US National Mapping Agency. they'd had inbound from a high school teacher who said they'd got an early map, and they're in New Jersey. They got an early map of a settlement, and what did the symbology mean on the map? And they were thinking that clearly they'd come from a surveying tradition in the UK, and therefore there might be some commonality to the symbology. And so I took it down to Cato and Jim Goldsmith here, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's clearly indicating a bit of marshland, and it runs up to a levee where you can see da da da." And so we provided this back, and of course, then I'm really hoping the high school teacher then took it into class and said, you know, I've had it from gospel. Yeah, I've had it from the source. And they said that. And then the second thing I really love about the benchmark, you know, this symbol. Yeah, this is a pheon. Yeah, this arrow, and it really just means of government issue. And so it's the thing. Do you remember in cartoons or in comedy capers, they would have someone in prison uniform and it would have arrows on it. That's because it was of government issue. But the benchmark symbol, so the pheon with the picnic table with the level above, which is known as a benchmark, right? It's the symbol it's a surveyor's symbol. It's graffitied all over the country, and I love that. There's 500,000 of them, and there's some really wonderful ones. Actually, in Oxford, look at the curbstones or look at the brickwork, and I love the idea. I mean, as you know, if you were a brand manager, who wouldn't be more pleased that someone's graffitied your logo all over the country? That benchmark, I think, is rather good. And again, long may that continue. Marks matter.
Yeah. Excellent. Now, moving swiftly on, hoping to get through a large number of questions.
Right.
Colin, no, not at all. Colin Riddler asks, archaeologists digging a site produce digital mapping data all the time. To what extent do you draw on their work?
We don't really. The only times we sometimes get involved is where we've got a new housing estate and archaeologists are working on site. Yeah, but we don't take any survey data from, say, Wessex Archaeology. What we do though, is we hire archaeologists. So we've found that, sorry, was it Colin who wrote?
Yes,
yeah,
Colin Riddler.
Colin, if he knows something about archaeology, he knows that the life of the archaeologist is not one that's rich of money. And often you're having to work on a piecemeal, on a specific dig, and then you're effectively let go at the end of the dig. And so what we found was all of those skills that have made archaeologists, you know, good at surveying, accurate, caring about the built and the natural environment. Actually, when they want to effectively have a more sustainable income, they want to buy a house, they want to get a mortgage, and so forth. They've come in as surveyors. So we've actually hired a whole bunch of surveyors who are ex-Wessex Archaeology, as an example. And again, I love that. You know, I'm a Roman history nut, so massive fan of Time Team. Time Team was invented. Television was invented just for Time Team. So we haven't got any direct relation there, but we do work with them. The other thing we do also do, which I haven't actually mentioned, is NUAR, the National Underground Asset Register, where we effectively run that on behalf of the government. That represents there's about 4 million kilometres of pipes and cables underneath the ground. That compares to about 400,000 kilometres of road in Great Britain. Yeah, so 10 times the amount of roads we've got as cables. And now, before you dig the road, you can now effectively say, well, has anybody got any cables or pipes underneath it? So that's not really a form of archaeologists, but an archaeologist may well be interested in the data that's held within that. Thanks.
Thank you. So Martin Davis, who is probably in a map room near us at the moment, asks, are you finding your computer vision experience increasingly relevant to the development of methods and technologies at OS? Is this a more relevant field to OS than large language models or generative AI?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And actually, when I was approached about the role, and that I said, well, what do I know about? I know you know I'm a mapping nut, but what do I know about how to produce maps? And actually, it was the recruiter who then said, yeah, but listen, all you've just spent the last 20 years all in computer vision, and increasingly the way the Ordnance Survey produces its data is through remote sensing, i.e. you're not going there and putting a probe in, you're doing it through drones, you're doing it through aerial, you're doing it through mixed sensors, so sensor fusion that's part of that. And as I said in my talk, the big breakthrough really in computer vision. So I've been in computer vision since the mid 90s, 1995. And the company there, we were founded as a spin actually, which was from Oxford Instruments. We were providing motion capture systems. Those little reflective markers that are people in lycra suits, and they use it to make movies. So that's what we did. And actually, so we knew an awful lot about computer vision, but AI didn't really figure because it was much more. It just wasn't capable of dealing with such large volumes or doing it in reliable ways. In 2012, the breakthrough with AlexNet of convolutional neural nets changed all of that and actually enabled AI to really make a very real difference. And that's the reason why on your phone you can do a plant detector or find pictures just of a certain person. That's all CNN's at work. And so the good news is, and again, I think it's about this the leading innovation that this place does and was doing anyway. We were super early on taking what was university level research and applying it to the problem of automatic feature extraction. And so that is all relevant. The thing about the LLMs is they are also relevant really for doing data discovery. But what clearly, as everybody knows on this call, LLMs also make stuff up, which isn't really very good for building a map. But actually, what LLMs are very good at doing is converting natural language, so the conversational English we use, and convert that into code. And so all we're doing really there is converting natural language into the database request for that data. And so then when it comes back, it can't hallucinate. It really is just doing a database query. So there are ways to use the Gen AI, but it's certainly not to start building maps automatically.
Thank you. Quick question now from an anonymous attender says, do you get involved with any moving objects such as road traffic?
Do we do any? I don't think we do. I know that people who take our data and then they take a live feed from someone else on that, but that's not within our area. We tend to do things that aren't moving. Well, again, the last business, I had a lot of things that were moving, but this one is all about things that don't move.
Good. Simplifies things. Thank you. Other question asks about, do you operate in any other countries? If so, in what way? And perhaps that's the opportunity to sort of talk a little bit about international collaboration,
Yeah,
in which OS is the GB representative.
sure. So we don't we don't sell our services or capability outside these shores. There was an initiative a number of years ago before I got here where we were doing that. The problem with it is the area is that invariably geography is political, yeah, and obviously because it makes up the very fabric of the country that is being ruled over. So it also is the area we've got disproportionate market advantage is in what we know about Great Britain. Yes, we've got some good techniques and tools and so forth, but they are very much honed for the Great Britain problem and aren't necessarily, without a high degree of customization, applicable in other countries. So for now, I'm very keen that we do the GB job really well. That said, although we are an island, metaphorically, we don't exist as an island. We have to make sure we do undertake collaborations, and so we work with FCDO on their own initiatives. So if FCDO wanted to support a developing economy with some geospatial expertise, then we do get involved with that. But that effectively is fronted by aid money coming from FCDO, and we then put our expert hat on. We work with international bodies on standards, so geodesy I mentioned, but even things like specifications, how should you survey buildings and so forth. We work on some of the standards of the way you share data as well. And then we also, every 4 years, we hold a thing called the Cambridge Conference, which is rather hilarious that it's often held in Oxford. And it's only history that's in there. The first one was in Cambridge, and it was a meeting of both the domestic and the overseas surveying offices. And now it's turned into a once every 4 years international conference where all of the leads and supporters of National Mapping Edges all get together and have a moan broadly, but then also try to talk about what the future might be. And actually, it's our 100-year anniversary of that in a couple of years' time. In fact, actually, we had the reception for that Cambridge conference in the Western Library as a way to, and actually Nick very wonderfully got out some of his special exhibits and wowed all of these people. And of course, he had a very highly engaged audience, yeah, because we're all in this industry because it speaks to our hearts as well as to our heads. So that's really the role in international. It's about making sure that we represent internationally and also participate with those groups to learn from them as much as they can learn from us.
Thank you. Well, there are some other questions are still coming in, but they're very largely sort of about themes we've talked about before. What 3 words is featuring, deliveries of featuring, and so on. So maybe we need to let you go because we've had more questions than we normally do, and it's we mustn't tax you anymore. But this was a fantastic talk. Thank you very much. I mean, it really is a spectacular level of interest we've had in the audience. And I think it speaks to I think the affection that the Ordnance Survey is sort of held in the mapping world, which is very nice. And I'm sure our audience want to join with Nick and me to wish the organisation every success in the future, because clearly you're doing a spectacular job there. So thank you for taking time out of your, well, I'm sure it's an exceptionally busy schedule to come and talk to us. It's been really fascinating.
The pleasure's been all
If I just may interject, I've made copies of all the questions that haven't been answered, so I can pass them on to you, Nick.
Yeah, we'll come back to you on those.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for doing that, Nick. So
Very good.
Remains for me to wish everybody a very good evening or good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are, from Oxford and TOSCA. And we look forward to seeing many of you again when we restart in the next academic year. Thank you for joining us. And thanks again to Nick for a really stimulating talk. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.